The first gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, sending a flock of startled birds into the darkening Texas sky. Dahlia Turner clutched her reticule tighter against her chest and quickened her pace, the hem of her dusty blue traveling dress catching on the brambles that lined the narrow path. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder hoofbeats and coarse laughter mingling with the wind that whipped across the open plains of West Texas in the summer of 1875. Dahlia had known coming west was dangerous, but she'd never imagined finding herself running for her life on her first night in Cottonwood Springs. The stagecoach robbery had been swift and violent. The driver shot, the other passengers relieved of their valuables and left stranded. But Dahlia had slipped away during the chaos, clutching the one thing she couldn't afford to lose: the deed to her late uncle's property and the small pouch of savings that represented her only chance at a new beginning. Now, as twilight settled over the landscape, she could see the silhouette of a barn standing sentinel at the edge of what must be someone's property. With no other shelter in sight and the outlaws drawing closer, Dahlia made her decision. She gathered her remaining strength and ran toward it, praying the owner wouldn't discover her until morning, by which time she hoped to be long gone. The barn door was mercifully unlocked. Dahlia slipped inside, the smell of hay and horses enveloping her as she pulled the heavy door closed behind her. Darkness surrounded her, broken only by thin ribbons of fading daylight that slipped through the cracks in the wooden walls. She pressed her back against the door, listening as the sounds of pursuit grew closer, then miraculously began to fade as the outlaws continued down the main road. Only when silence returned did Dahlia allow herself to breathe. Her legs, trembling from exertion and fear, finally gave way. She slid down to the dirt floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. "I reckon you'd better have a mighty fine explanation for being in my barn, madam." The deep voice cut through the darkness like a knife. Dahlia gasped, scrambling backward until her shoulders hit the door. A match flared to life, illuminating the face of a man standing not 10 feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face that spoke of years under the unforgiving western sun. His eyes, the color of the sky before a storm, regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity as he lit a lantern hanging from a nearby post. "I mean you no harm," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was just seeking shelter for the night. I'll be gone by morning, I promise." He stepped closer, the lantern casting long shadows across his features. He wore no gun that she could see, but the way he carried himself suggested he knew how to handle one. His dark brown hair was tousled beneath a well-worn hat, and several days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw. "You're running from something," he observed, his gaze flicking to the door and back to her face. "Or someone." It wasn't a question, but Dahlia nodded anyway. "Outlaws," she whispered. "They robbed the stagecoach I was traveling on. I managed to get away, but they've been following me." The man's expression hardened. He moved to the barn door and opened it just enough to peer out into the gathering darkness. After a moment, he closed it again and slid a heavy wooden bar into place. "Didn't see anyone nearby, but that doesn't mean they ain't out there," he said, turning back to face her. "You hurt?" Dahlia shook her head. "Just frightened." "You got a name, Dahlia? Dahlia Turner." He nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "Blake Jameson." "This is my ranch you've wandered onto, Miss Turner." Blake. The name suited him, she thought. Solid and straightforward like the man himself seemed to be. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Jameson. As I said, I'll be gone by nightfall's no time to be wandering these parts, especially with outlaws about," he interrupted. "You'll stay the night. My house is just over the ridge. You can have a proper meal and a bed, Then be on your way come morning if that's what you still want." Dahlia hesitated. Her mother had raised her to be cautious around strangers, especially men. But there was something in Blake Jameson's direct gaze that spoke of honesty, and the thought of spending the night alone in the barn or worse, continuing on in the darkness, made her shudder. "I don't wish to impose," she said softly. "It's no imposition. Can't in good conscience leave a lady out here alone." He paused, then added in a gentler tone, "You have my word, Miss Turner, you're safe here." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was the quiet conviction in his voice, but Dahlia found herself nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson." He offered his hand to help her up. After a moment's hesitation, Dahlia placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm and steady as he pulled her to her feet. For a brief moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him, before he stepped back and gestured toward the door. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, will be turning in soon, but I reckon she can fix you something to eat before she does," he said, lifting the wooden bar from the door. "Stay close. The path can be tricky in the dark." As they stepped outside, Dahlia cast one last nervous glance at the road she'd traveled. The twilight had deepened into full darkness, the stars emerging like scattered diamonds across the vast Texas sky. "They won't find you here," Blake said, correctly interpreting her worry. "And if they do, they'll have me to deal with." The quiet confidence in his voice was somehow more reassuring than any bravado might have been. He led her along a winding path that crested a small ridge. Just beyond it, nestled in a protected hollow, stood a sturdy two-story house. Light glowed warmly from several windows and smoke curled from the chimney. It looked, to Dahlia's weary eyes, like a haven. As they approached, Blake suddenly stopped, turning to face her. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice low and serious, "I want you to know something. As long as you're under my roof, you needn't fear. Not outlaws, not anything. I give you my word on that." The solemnity of his promise caught Dahlia by surprise. She looked up at him, this stranger who was offering her sanctuary, and felt something shift inside her, a small loosening of the knot of fear that had been her constant companion since the stagecoach robbery. "Thank you," she said simply. Blake nodded once, then continued toward the house. As Dahlia followed him, she couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had led her to this man's doorstep, and what awaited her now that she had found it. The interior of Blake's home was modest but comfortable, with solid furniture and practical touches that spoke of a man who valued function over ornamentation. A plump, gray-haired woman looked up from the stove as they entered the kitchen, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Dahlia. "Mrs. Wilkins, this is Miss Turner," Blake said. "She had some trouble on the road and will be staying with us tonight." The housekeeper's shrewd eyes took in Dahlia's disheveled appearance, but her voice was kind when she spoke. "You poor thing, sit yourself down and I'll fix you a plate. You look half-starved." "Thank you, but I don't want to be any trouble," Dahlia began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilkins interrupted, already bustling around the kitchen. "No trouble at all. Mr. Jameson, you'll be wanting supper as well." "Much obliged, Mrs. Wilkins," Blake said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table for Dahlia, then took a seat across from her. As Mrs. Wilkins set plates of steaming food before them, beef stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves, Dahlia realized how hungry she truly was. She hadn't eaten since that morning, before boarding the ill-fated stagecoach. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Turner," Blake said as they ate, "what brings you to these parts? Not many young ladies travel alone to West Texas." Dahlia hesitated, weighing how much to share with this stranger, but something in his direct, honest gaze encouraged honesty in return. "My uncle passed away 3 months ago," she explained. He left me his property here, a small ranch just outside of Cottonwood Springs. I was a school teacher in St. Louis, but after my mother died last year, there was nothing keeping me there. I thought perhaps I could make a new start here. Blake's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your losses. Thank you, Dahlia murmured, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. The stagecoach was supposed to take me all the way to town, but then the robbery happened. The driver was killed, and the outlaws took everything from the other passengers. I managed to slip away with my papers and what little money I had. Did you recognize any of the men? Blake asked, his voice sharpening. Dahlia shook her head. They wore bandanas over their faces, but one of them, the leader, I think, he had a scar across his right hand, like a burn. Blake and Mrs. Wilkins exchanged a quick glance that didn't escape Dahlia's notice. What is it? She asked. Do you know who they might be? Blake set down his fork with deliberate care. Sounds like the Taggart gang. They've been causing trouble in these parts for a few months now. Stagecoach robberies, mostly, but they've hit a couple of homesteads, too. The sheriff's been trying to catch them, Mrs. Wilkins added, but they know the territory too well. Always seem to vanish just when he thinks he's closing in. Your uncle's property, Blake said slowly. Would that be the old Turner place about 5 miles east of town? Dahlia nodded, surprised. You knew my uncle. Everyone around here knew Samuel Turner, Blake said with a hint of a smile. Good man. Fair in his dealings, kept to himself mostly, but always willing to lend a hand when needed. The mention of her uncle brought a lump to Dahlia's throat. She'd only met him a handful of times as a child, but she remembered a quiet, kind man who always brought her peppermint sticks when he visited. I haven't seen the property yet, she admitted. I only have the deed and a letter from the lawyer explaining that it was left to me. Blake's expression turned thoughtful. It's been sitting empty since your uncle passed. Might need some work before it's properly livable again. Dahlia felt her heart sink. She hadn't considered that the property might be in disrepair. Her small savings wouldn't stretch far if major work was needed. As if reading her thoughts, Blake continued, but the land itself is good. Rich soil, good water access. Your uncle kept it well. Thank you for telling me, Dahlia said softly. Mrs. Wilkins, who had been observing their conversation with interest, now stepped forward. You must be exhausted, dear. Let me show you to a room where you can rest. Dahlia started to rise, then paused, looking at Blake. Mr. Jameson, I'm deeply grateful for your hospitality. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Blake inclined his head slightly. Get some rest, Miss Turner. We can talk more in the morning. Mrs. Wilkins led Dahlia upstairs to a small but clean bedroom. There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up, the housekeeper said, and I'll find you a nightgown you can borrow. You're very kind, Dahlia said. Both of you. Mrs. Wilkins smiled. Mr. Jameson's a good man. Don't let his gruff ways fool you. He's got a heart as big as Texas, that one. After the housekeeper left, Dahlia washed her face and hands in the cool water, grateful to remove at least some of the dust from her journey. When Mrs. Wilkins returned with a simple cotton nightgown, Dahlia thanked her again. Left alone, Dahlia changed quickly and crawled into the bed. She had expected to lie awake, her mind racing with thoughts of outlaws and uncertain futures, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of Blake Jameson's steady blue eyes and his solemn promise. You needn't fear. Not outlaws, not anything. Dawn broke clear and golden over the Texas landscape, filtering through the thin curtains of Dahlia's borrowed room. For a moment upon waking, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings causing a brief spike of panic before the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was safe, at least for now. A light knock at the door preceded Mrs. Wilkins' cheerful voice. "Miss Turner, are you awake? Breakfast will be ready shortly." "Yes, thank you," Dahlia called back. "I'll be down in a moment." She dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, wishing she had something fresher to wear. Her trunk, containing all her worldly possessions, had been on the stagecoach. She could only hope it had made it to Cottonwood Springs despite the robbery, though she wasn't optimistic. When Dahlia descended the stairs, she found Blake already seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. He rose when she entered, offering a polite nod. "Good morning, Miss Turner. I trust you slept well." "I did, thank you," Dahlia replied, taking the seat he indicated. "I can't remember the last time I slept so soundly." "Safety will do that," Blake commented, retaking his seat as Mrs. Wilkins placed a steaming plate of eggs and bacon before Dahlia. "I rode the property line at first light. No sign of anyone who shouldn't be there." Relief washed over Dahlia. "That's reassuring." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Blake spoke again. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Turner. I'm headed into Cottonwood Springs this morning to pick up some supplies. I'd be happy to take you to your uncle's property on the way." Dahlia looked up in surprise. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Jameson." "It's on my way," he said with a slight shrug, though they both knew it likely wasn't. "And it wouldn't be right to let you travel alone with the Taggart gang still out there." "I accept your offer gratefully," Dahlia said, "but I don't want to keep imposing on your kindness." Blake set down his coffee cup, his expression serious. "Miss Turner out here, neighbors look out for each other. Your uncle understood that. He'd expect me to see his niece safely settled." There was something in his tone that brooked no argument, and Dahlia found herself nodding. "Very well, thank you." After breakfast, Blake excused himself to prepare the wagon while Dahlia helped Mrs. Wilkins with the dishes, despite the older woman's protests. "It's the least I can do after all your hospitality," Dahlia insisted. Mrs. Wilkins studied her for a moment, then smiled. "You're not what I expected Samuel Turner's niece to be like." "Oh, did you know him well?" "Well enough," the housekeeper said, her hands efficient as she dried a plate. "He was a solitary sort, but kind, strong-willed too. I see some of that in you." Dahlia was touched by the comparison. "I hope I can live up to his legacy." "You just be yourself, dear," Mrs. Wilkins advised. "That's all any of us can do." When the dishes were done, Dahlia gathered her few belongings, her reticule with the precious deed and her dwindling funds. Mrs. Wilkins pressed a small bundle into her hands. "Some food for your journey," the housekeeper explained, "and a few essentials to tide you over until you can get properly settled." "I can't accept," Dahlia began. "You can and you will," Mrs. Wilkins said firmly. "Consider it a welcome to Texas gift." Outside, Blake was waiting with a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped Dahlia up onto the seat, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, which she quickly attributed to the morning sun. The journey to Cottonwood Springs was more pleasant than Dahlia had anticipated. The landscape, which had seemed so threatening in the twilight of the previous day, revealed its beauty in the morning light. Rolling hills dotted with oak and mesquite trees, wildflowers adding splashes of color along the roadside, and in the distance, the jagged silhouette of mountains against the clear blue sky. Blake proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history. Though not naturally talkative, he answered Dahlia's questions with patience, and occasionally volunteered information about the area and its inhabitants. "That ridge there marks the western boundary of what used to be Comanche territory," he explained at one point. "The peace is held for the most part, but there's still tension sometimes." "Have you lived here long?" Dahlia asked. "All my life." Blake replied. "My father established our ranch 30 years ago. I took over after he passed about 5 years back." "I'm sorry for your loss," Dahlia said softly. Blake nodded in acknowledgement. "It's the way of things. He lived a good life." They fell into a comfortable silence after that, the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves the only sounds for several miles. As they approached what must be her uncle's property, Dahlia felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. What would she find? Would the place be livable? And more importantly, could she truly make a new life for herself here, so far from everything familiar? The road curved around a stand of oak trees, and suddenly, there it was, a modest single-story ranch house with a wide porch, set back from the road. A barn and corral stood to one side, and beyond them stretched acres of grassland, broken by the silver ribbon of a creek. Blake drew the wagon to a halt in front of the house. "Here we are, the Turner Ranch." Dahlia stared at her inheritance, emotions warring within her. It was simultaneously less and more than she had imagined. The house was smaller than she'd pictured, and clearly in need of some repair. The porch sagged slightly at one corner, and the paint was peeling from the clapboards. But there was something undeniably appealing about its sturdy simplicity and the beautiful setting. "It needs work," Blake said, echoing her thoughts, "but the bones are good." He jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her descend. As her feet touched the ground, Dahlia felt a curious sensation, as if she had arrived somewhere important, somewhere that mattered. "Would you like to see inside?" Blake asked. Dahlia nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. She followed him up the path to the porch, waiting as he retrieved a key from a hiding place her uncle must have shown him. The door creaked open to reveal a dusty but well-proportioned main room, with a stone fireplace at one end and windows that let in streams of morning light. A kitchen area occupied one corner, with a hand pump at the sink that suggested indoor plumbing, a luxury Dahlia hadn't dared hope for. A short hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "The furniture's still here," Blake observed. "Your uncle's lawyer must have kept everything as it was." Dahlia ran her hand along the back of a solid oak chair. "It's more than I expected," she admitted, "though it will need a thorough cleaning. And some repairs," Blake added, testing a loose floorboard with his boot. "The roof looks sound from what I could see, but I'd need to check it properly." "I don't want to take any more of your time," Dahlia said quickly. "You've already been so kind." Blake studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Miss Turner, I don't think you understand the situation fully. This property has been sitting empty for 3 months. It's not just a matter of cleaning. There's livestock to tend to. Your uncle had a small herd of cattle and some chickens that the neighbors have been looking after. The fields need attention. It's not work for one person, especially not someone new to ranching." Dahlia felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Of course, he was right. What did she, a city-bred schoolteacher, know about running a ranch? Her plan to start a new life suddenly seemed naive and ill-conceived. "I see," she said quietly. "Perhaps I should consider selling then." Something like disapproval flashed across Blake's face. "That's not what I meant. Your uncle built this place from nothing. It would be a shame to see it pass out of the family so quickly." "What alternative do I have?" Dahlia asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "I can't hire help. The little money I had is barely enough to feed myself for a month, let alone pay workers. And as you've pointed out, I know nothing about ranching." "You can learn," Blake said simply. "And neighbors help each other out here. That's how it works. I can't impose on strangers kindness indefinitely." "Not indefinitely," Blake agreed, "but until you get on your feet, yes, you can. That's how communities survive out here." Dahlia moved to the window, looking out at the land that was now hers. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way that called to something deep within her. The thought of giving it up, of returning east in defeat, made her heart ache. "I don't know the first thing about cattle," she admitted. "You'll learn," Blake said again, coming to stand beside her. "And in the meantime I can help. So can others from around here who respected your uncle." Dahlia turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of condescension or pity. She found neither, only a straightforward offer of assistance. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You barely know me." Blake's gaze held her steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because your uncle was a good man who would have done the same for my kin if positions were reversed. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I think you've got more grit than you give yourself credit for, Miss Turner. I'd like to see what you make of this place." Something in his assessment, the casual confidence in her abilities, sparked a determination in Dahlia that she hadn't realized she possessed. Perhaps she couldn't do this alone, but with help, with time to learn. "All right," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I'll stay. I'll learn. And I'll make this work somehow." A hint of a smile touched Blake's lips. "Good. Now let's head into town. You'll need supplies, and I expect you'll want to inquire after your trunk. And there's someone there you should meet, Doc Wilson. He was a friend of your uncle's, and he's as good a source of local information as you'll find." As they returned to the wagon, Dahlia cast one last look at the house, her house now. It needed work, certainly. But so did she. Perhaps they could heal each other. The ride into Cottonwood Springs took less than half an hour. The town was larger than Dahlia had expected, with a main street lined with businesses, a general store, a hotel, a bank, and various other establishments that spoke of a thriving community. People moved along the boardwalks with purpose, and wagons and riders created a steady flow of traffic on the dusty street. Blake guided the wagon to a hitching post in front of the general store. As he helped Dahlia down, she was acutely aware of the curious glances sent their way by passers-by. "Word travels fast in small towns," Blake murmured, correctly interpreting her discomfort. "They're just curious about Samuel Turner's niece." Inside the general store, a bell jingled as they entered. The proprietor, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, looked up and broke into a wide smile. "Blake Jameson, about time you showed up. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about that order of yours." His gaze shifted to Dahlia, curiosity evident in his expression. "Morning, Howard," Blake said. "This is Miss Dahlia Turner, Samuel's niece from back east. Miss Turner, this is Howard Mills, owner of the finest general store in the county." "The only general store in the county, you mean?" Howard chuckled, coming around the counter to shake Dahlia's hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Miss Turner. Your uncle was a valued customer and friend." "Thank you," Dahlia said. "It seems everyone here has kind words about my uncle." "Samuel was one of the good ones," Howard agreed. "We were all sorry to hear of his passing. But it's good to know his place has gone to family." As Blake discussed his order with Howard, Dahlia took the opportunity to explore the store, mentally cataloging items she would need to make her uncle's house livable again. The prices were somewhat higher than she was used to in St. Louis, but not unreasonably so. She was examining a display of fabric when a voice called out from the doorway. "Is that Blake Jameson's wagon I see outside?" The man himself finally graced us with his presence. Dahlia turned to see a slender man in his 60s enter the store. Despite his age, he moved with the vigor of someone much younger. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and he carried himself with an air of quiet authority. Blake's expression warmed at the sight of the newcomer. "Doc Wilson, just the man I was hoping to see." The doctor's keen eyes found Dahlia immediately. "And who might this young lady be?" Dahlia Turner, sir, she answered before Blake could. Samuel Turner was my uncle. Doc Wilson's face broke into a delighted smile. Samuel's niece. Well, this is a pleasant surprise indeed. He spoke of you often, you know, was mighty proud of his schoolteacher niece back east. A lump formed in Dahlia's throat. He did. I had no idea. We corresponded, but not as often as I now wish we had. That's the way of it sometimes, the doctor said kindly. But he kept every letter you sent him, had them in a box on his mantel. The thought of her uncle treasuring her letters brought tears to Dahlia's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. I've just seen the property for the first time. Well, it needs some work. That it does, Doc Wilson agreed. Been sitting empty these 3 months, but it's good land and the house is solid. Samuel built it to last. Miss Turner is planning to stay, Blake said. Make a go of the ranch. The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. Is that so? Well, good for you, young lady. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. So I'm beginning to understand, Dahlia said with a small smile. Have you inquired about your belongings yet? Blake asked. The stagecoach office is just down the street. I should do that, Dahlia agreed. And I need to visit the bank as well to present my deed. I'll walk with you, Doc Wilson offered. I'm headed that way myself, and I can introduce you to a few folks who should know Samuel's niece has arrived. Dahlia glanced at Blake, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. I'll be a while here with Howard anyway. Meet you back at the wagon in an hour. Thank you, Dahlia said. For everything. As she walked down the main street with Doc Wilson, the doctor proved to be a fount of information about Cottonwood Springs and its inhabitants. He pointed out buildings and businesses, sharing anecdotes and introducing Dahlia to those they encountered along the way. That there's the Wilcox place, he said, indicating a well-maintained 2-story building. Best boarding house in town, run by Widow Wilcox. Excellent cook, though she'll talk your ear off given half a chance. At the stagecoach office, Dahlia was relieved to discover that her trunk had indeed arrived on a subsequent coach. The manager, a sympathetic man named Parker, had heard about the robbery and had been holding her belongings. Terrible business, that, Parker said as he retrieved her trunk from the back room. Sheriff Miller's been trying to track down the Taggart gang for months now, slippery as eels they are. Has anyone been hurt besides the driver of my coach? Dahlia asked. Parker's expression turned grim. They shot up the Fredericks place last month when Mr. Frederick tried to stand up to them. He'll walk with a limp for the rest of his days. Dahlia felt a chill at this confirmation of the outlaws' brutality. Is there no way to stop them? Sheriff's doing his best, Doc Wilson interjected, but they know the territory too well. Hide out in the hills where it's near impossible to find them. After arranging for her trunk to be delivered to her uncle's ranch, Dahlia and Doc Wilson continued to the bank. The banker, a serious man named Mr. Holloway, examined her deed and papers with meticulous care before pronouncing them in order. Your uncle's accounts are modest but solvent, Miss Turner, he informed her. He was a careful man with his money. The ranch itself is free and clear of any debt, which is more than can be said for many in these parts. This news lifted a weight from Dahlia's shoulders. Even if her own funds were limited, at least she wasn't inheriting a mountain of debt along with the property. As they left the bank, Doc Wilson suggested they stop at the town's small cafe for a cup of coffee. You've had quite a morning, he observed. A moment to catch your breath might be welcome. Dahlia gratefully accepted, and soon they were seated at a small table by the window. The cafe was busy but not crowded, and several patrons nodded politely to Doc Wilson as they entered. So, the doctor said once their coffee had arrived, what made you decide to come west, Miss Turner? Samuel mentioned you had a teaching position in St. Louis. I did, Dahlia confirmed. But after my mother passed away last year, there wasn't much keeping me there. When I received word of Uncle Samuel's death and the inheritance, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. Doc Wilson studied her over the rim of his cup. Running from something or running to something? The directness of the question startled Dahlia. I'm not sure I understand. In my experience, the doctor said, folks who pull up stakes and head west are usually doing one or the other, sometimes both. Dahlia considered the question seriously. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted. After Mother died, the house felt empty, and my teaching position, while respectable, wasn't particularly fulfilling. I suppose I was looking for something more, though I couldn't have told you what that more might be. And now, having seen your inheritance, now I'm terrified I've made a terrible mistake, Dahlia said with a small laugh. I know nothing about ranching, but at the same time, there's something about this place, about the land, that calls to me. Does that make any sense? Doc Wilson's eyes crinkled with understanding. Perfect sense. The land has a way of getting under your skin. It's demanding, unforgiving sometimes, but there's a freedom here you won't find back east. Mr. Jameson has offered to help me get started, Dahlia said, her thoughts turning to Blake. He's been uncommonly kind. Blake's a good man, Doc Wilson said. One of the best. Doesn't say much, but when he gives his word, you can count on it. So Mrs. Wilkins said as well. The doctor smiled. Eleanor Wilkins has been keeping Blake's house and Blake himself in order since his mother passed when he was just a boy. She'd know better than most. Their conversation was interrupted by the cafe door opening with enough force to bang against the wall. A man in a sheriff's badge strode in, his expression grim. He spotted Doc Wilson immediately and made his way to their table. Doc, glad I found you, he said without preamble. There's been trouble out at the Miller place. Taggart gang again. Doc Wilson's expression darkened. Anyone hurt? Tom Miller took a bullet in the shoulder, the sheriff said. His wife managed to get him into town, but he's losing blood fast. She took him straight to your office. The doctor was on his feet immediately, leaving money on the table for their coffee. Miss Turner, I apologize for cutting our conversation short, but duty calls. Of course, Dahlia said. Please go to your patient. Only then did the sheriff seem to register her presence. Madam, he said with a nod, tipping his hat. Sheriff James Rawlins, you're new in town. This is Dahlia Turner, Samuel's niece, Doc Wilson explained quickly. She's just arrived to take over her uncle's place. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Well, welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Miss Turner. Wish it could be under better circumstances. Thank you, Sheriff, Dahlia replied. Is there anything I can do to help? Just stay alert, Rawlins advised. The Taggart gang's getting bolder. Used to stick to stagecoaches, but they've been hitting ranches more often lately. Don't open your door to strangers, especially after dark. With that sobering warning, the sheriff and Doc Wilson departed, leaving Dahlia alone with her coffee and her thoughts. The mention of the Taggart gang had brought back the fear she'd felt the previous night, hiding in Blake's barn. How could she possibly manage alone at her uncle's isolated ranch with such dangers lurking nearby? She was still pondering this question when a shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she found Blake standing there, concern evident in his expression. I saw the sheriff and Doc rush out, he said. Everything all right? Dahlia explained what had happened, watching Blake's face darken as she relayed the news about the attack on the Miller ranch. Tom Miller's a good man, Blake said when she had finished. Has a wife and 3 young children. The sheriff seemed to think he would survive, Dahlia offered. If anyone can save him, Doc Wilson can, Blake agreed. He hesitated, then said, Miss Turner, in light of this news, I have to ask, are you certain you want to stay at your uncle's place? It's isolated, and if the Taggart gang is targeting ranches. Where else would I go? Dahlia asked. I can't afford the boarding house indefinitely, and I refuse to abandon my inheritance before I've even properly begun. Blake studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious. You're determined, I'll give you that. I'm not fearless, Dahlia admitted. In fact, I'm quite terrified. But I've come too far to turn back now. A hint of approval flickered in Blake's gaze. Fair enough. But I'm not comfortable with you staying out there alone, at least not until we get a better handle on where the Taggart gang is operating. What do you suggest? I have a spare room at my ranch, Blake said. You could stay there while we get your place cleaned up and repaired. It would give you time to learn about ranching without having to worry about your safety quite so much. Dahlia was taken aback by the offer. That's extremely generous, Mr. Jameson, but I couldn't possibly impose on you to that extent. It's not an imposition, Blake insisted. Mrs. Wilkins would welcome the company, and as I said, your uncle's place needs work before it's properly livable again. This way, you'd have a safe base of operations while you decide how to proceed. The practical side of Dahlia recognized the wisdom in his suggestion. Her uncle's house was indeed in need of significant cleaning and repair. And the thought of spending nights alone there, jumping at every sound, was less than appealing. I would insist on contributing to my keep, she said, and helping with the household chores. That's between you and Mrs. Wilkins, Blake said with a slight smile. I stay out of her domain as much as possible. Dahlia found herself returning his smile. A wise policy, I'm sure. So you'll consider it. I'll do more than consider it, Dahlia decided. I accept your offer, Mr. Jameson, with gratitude, but only until my uncle's house is habitable. I won't take advantage of your kindness. It's settled then, Blake said, rising from his seat. We should finish our business in town. I'd like to get back to the ranch before dark. As they walked back to the wagon, Dahlia was struck by how quickly her circumstances had changed. 24 hours ago, she had been hiding in a barn, terrified for her life. Now she had seen her inheritance, met some of the town's residents, and accepted temporary lodging with a man who was quickly becoming more than just a kind stranger. She glanced at Blake as he loaded her newly purchased supplies into the wagon. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength and integrity that drew her, despite her natural caution around men she didn't know well. Perhaps it was the way he had immediately offered protection when she needed it most, or the respect with which everyone in town seemed to regard him. Whatever it was, Dahlia found herself glad that fate had led her to his barn last night. In this new, unfamiliar territory, Blake Jameson was quickly becoming the one solid thing she could rely on. The next few days established a routine that Dahlia found both challenging and surprisingly satisfying. Each morning after breakfast, Blake would drive her to her uncle's property, where they would work on making the house habitable again. Dahlia cleaned while Blake tackled the necessary repairs, fixing the sagging porch, replacing broken window panes, and ensuring the roof was sound. Mrs. Wilkins had packed lunches for them, which they would eat on the porch, watching the play of light across the grasslands that stretched beyond the property. During these quiet moments, Dahlia would often ask Blake questions about ranching, soaking up his knowledge like parched earth absorbing rain. "How many cattle did my uncle keep?" she asked on the third day as they shared a lunch of cold chicken and bread. "About 30 head, Blake replied. "A small herd but good quality stock. He was selective about his breeding. Most are being looked after by the Hendersons, whose ranch borders yours to the north. And they've been doing this out of kindness. For 3 months, Blake nodded. That's how it works out here. The Hendersons know that if they were in trouble, your uncle would have done the same for them." "I'll need to thank them properly," Dahlia mused. and learn how to manage cattle. I've never even been close to a cow before coming west." Blake's lips twitched with amusement. "We'll start with the basics. No sense overwhelming you all at once." In the afternoons, they would return to Blake's ranch, where he would introduce Dahlia to the practical aspects of ranch life. He showed her how to care for horses, explained the seasonal rhythms of cattle raising, and even taught her to recognize the various grasses and plants that grew on the land which were beneficial for grazing, which were harmful, and which had medicinal properties. Dahlia was a quick study, her schoolteacher's mind readily absorbing new information. But it was the physical work that surprised her the most. Despite the aching muscles and sunburned nose she developed in those first days, she found unexpected satisfaction in the tangible results of her labor. "You're not what I expected," Blake commented on the 5th day as they rode back to his ranch. He had begun teaching her to ride, another skill she would need as a ranch owner. "Oh, what did you expect?" Dahlia asked, adjusting her seat in the saddle of the gentle mare Blake had assigned to her. He considered for a moment. "Someone more fragile, I suppose. Most women coming from the city would have given up by now, faced with all this work and dust." "Perhaps I'm more my uncle's niece than I realized," Dahlia said with a smile. "Or perhaps I simply have no better options." "No, it's more than that," Blake said, his perceptive gaze making her feel oddly exposed. "You have grit." Coming from Blake, Dahlia knew this was high praise indeed. She felt a warm glow of pride at his assessment. Their evenings at the Jameson ranch had fallen into a pleasant pattern as well. After supper, which they shared with Mrs. Wilkins, they would often sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in fiery hues. Sometimes they talked, Blake telling stories of his father or of local history, Dahlia sharing tales of her life in St. Louis. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was during one such evening, about a week after Dahlia's arrival, that Blake broached a subject he had thus far avoided. "Sheriff Rawlins stopped by the general store while you were at the milliner's yesterday," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tom Miller's on the mend, but the Taggart gang hit another place last night, the Thompson farm, about 15 miles east of here." Dahlia's hand stilled in her lap. "Were people hurt?" "No, thankfully. The Thompsons were in town for a church social. The gang ransacked the house, took what valuables they could find, and ran off some livestock." "They're growing bolder," Dahlia observed. Blake nodded grimly. "The sheriff's organized a posse. They're out searching the hills now, but—" He trailed off, his doubt evident. "You don't think they'll find them? The hills have 100 hiding places, and the Taggarts know them all. It would take an army to search properly, and even then they could slip away." Dahlia shivered despite the warm evening air. "Do you think they'll come here? Or to my uncle's place?" Blake's expression was solemn in the fading light. "I can't say for certain they won't, but my ranch is well known and I have hands who keep watch. We're not an easy target." "And my uncle's property? Sitting empty except for the few hours we spend there each day. That's what concerns me," Blake admitted. "It might look like easy pickings to them." Dahlia felt a surge of determination. "Then we need to make it look less so. Perhaps we should stay there during the day, make it obvious the property is occupied again." Blake studied her with newfound respect. "That's actually a good strategy. The Taggarts prefer targets that won't fight back. If they think someone's living there full time, they might move on to easier marks." "We could bring lunch and stay until evening," Dahlia suggested, warming to the idea. "I could even start replanting the kitchen garden I found, show signs of permanent habitation." "We'll start tomorrow," Blake agreed. "And I'll speak to some of my hands about keeping an eye on the place when we're not there." As darkness settled over the land, Dahlia found herself studying Blake's profile in the dim light from the window behind them. His strong features were set in lines of concern, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon as if he could spot threats by sheer force of will. "Thank you," she said softly. He turned to look at her, eyebrows raised in question. "For everything," Dahlia clarified. "For taking me in that first night, for helping me with the property, for teaching me about ranching, for caring about my safety." Blake's expression softened slightly. "You don't need to thank me for that. Nevertheless, I am grateful. I don't know what I would have done without your help." "You'd have managed," Blake said with quiet confidence. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Dahlia." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart beat a little faster. The moment stretched between them, filled with something Dahlia couldn't quite name but could definitely feel a connection, a possibility. Then Blake cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. We should turn in if we're planning a full day at your place tomorrow." "Yes, of course," Dahlia agreed, accepting his hand to help her rise from her chair. His fingers were warm and calloused against hers, the brief contact sending a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with fear. As she prepared for bed that night, Dahlia found her thoughts returning again and again to Blake. His kindness, his strength, the rare smiles that transformed his serious face and made her want to elicit more of them. It was dangerous territory, she knew. She had come west to claim her inheritance and build a new life, not to develop feelings for the first man who showed her kindness. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, it was Blake's face she saw, those steady blue eyes that had promised she would never need to fear again. True to their plan, Dahlia and Blake began spending full days at the Turner ranch. The house was now clean and the essential repairs completed, making it a pleasant place to spend time. Dahlia had moved some of her clothes and personal items from her trunk, giving the place a more lived-in appearance, and had indeed started replanting the kitchen garden with seeds Mrs. Wilkins had generously provided. On a particularly warm afternoon about 2 weeks after Dahlia's arrival in Cottonwood Springs, she and Blake were sitting on the newly repaired porch, taking a break from their respective tasks. Dahlia had been cleaning out the root cellar, while Blake had been mending fences in the corral. "I think it's time we brought your cattle back," Blake said, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "The Hendersons have been more than generous, but they're your responsibility now." Dahlia felt a flutter of anxiety. "Do you think I'm ready?" "As ready as you'll ever be without actually doing it," Blake replied pragmatically. "You've learned the basics. The rest comes with experience. And you'll help." Dahlia couldn't keep the note of worry from her voice. Blake's expression softened. "I said I would, didn't I? I'll ride over tomorrow and speak with John Henderson about driving the herd back here. And I can spare one of my hands, Miguel, to help you get started. He's good with cattle and a patient teacher." Relief washed over Dahlia. "Thank you. I know I keep saying that, but I truly am grateful." "You're doing well, Dahlia," Blake said, his use of her first name no longer unusual between them. "Better than many would in your position." She smiled at the compliment. "I have a good teacher." A faint redness that had nothing to do with the sun touched Blake's cheeks, and he cleared his throat. "We should get back to work if we want to finish before dark." As Dahlia rose to return to the root cellar, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn toward the road. A rider was approaching at a gallop, dust rising behind him. Blake was instantly alert, moving to stand slightly in front of Dahlia. His hand went to his hip, where he wore a revolver, something he had started doing since the news of the Thompson farm being raided. As the rider drew closer, Blake relaxed slightly. "It's Doc Wilson," he said, recognizing the figure. The doctor reined in his horse sharply as he reached the yard, his usually composed features tight with urgency. "Blake, Dahlia, thank goodness you're here. I've been riding all over looking for you." "What's happened?" Blake asked, stepping forward to help the older man dismount. "The Taggart gang," Doc Wilson said grimly. "They shot up the bank in town this morning, made off with the payroll for the railroad workers that had just been delivered." Dahlia gasped. "Was anyone hurt?" "Mr. Holloway took a bullet in the leg, but he'll live," the doctor replied. "One of the gang wasn't so lucky. Sheriff Rawlins managed to wing him before they escaped." "They got away, though?" Blake asked. Doc Wilson nodded. "Headed east from town, according to witnesses. The sheriff's organized another posse, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Dahlia. "But what?" she prompted. "Some of the men in town are saying they're headed this way," the doctor said reluctantly. "Toward Turner Land." Dahlia felt her blood run cold. "Why would they come here?" "Your uncle's property borders the foothills," Blake explained, his expression grim. "It's the most direct route to their suspected hideout in the high country. And with a wounded man, they'll be looking for a place to hole up," Doc Wilson added. "An empty ranch house would be mighty tempting." "But it's not empty," Dahlia protested. "We're here." "They don't know that," Blake said. "All they know is that Samuel Turner died 3 months ago and the place has been sitting vacant." Dahlia looked between the two men, reality sinking in. "They're coming here, to my home." Blake's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." He turned to Doc Wilson. "How long ago did this happen?" "Bank was hit just after opening, maybe 3 hours ago now," the doctor replied. "I came straight here after tending to Holloway." Blake was already moving toward the corral where their horses were tethered. "We need to get you back to my ranch," he said to Dahlia. "It's safer there with more people." "But if I leave, they'll think the place is empty," Dahlia argued. "They'll break in, maybe burn it down. Everything I have is here." "Your life is worth more than property," Blake countered, his voice sharp with concern. "What if we made it clear the place is occupied?" Doc Wilson suggested. "Lights in every window, smoke from the chimney make it look like the last place a gang on the run would want to stop." Blake shook his head. "Too risky. If they're desperate enough, they might not care who's inside." "Then we bring in more men," Dahlia said, an idea forming. "Is the posse headed this way? Could they use this house as a base to search the hills?" Blake and Doc Wilson exchanged a look. "That might actually work," the doctor said slowly. "If Sheriff Rawlins brought his men here, it would be the last place the Taggarts would want to approach." "It would put Dahlia in the middle of a potential gunfight," Blake objected. "Not if I go with you to your ranch," Dahlia countered. "The sheriff and his men could use the house while we stay safely away." Blake considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "It could work. Doc, can you ride back to town and tell Rawlins our plan? Tell him we're making the Turner place available as a base for his search." "I can do that," Doc Wilson agreed, already moving back toward his horse. "And Doc," Blake added, his voice deadly serious, "tell him to hurry. If the Taggarts are headed this way with a wounded man, they'll be looking to hole up before nightfall." As the doctor galloped away, Blake turned to Dahlia. "We need to gather your essentials and go. Now." Dahlia didn't argue. She hurried into the house, Blake close behind her. She grabbed her most precious possessions, the deed to the property, her mother's locket, the few items of value she owned, and stuffed them into a carpet bag. Blake, meanwhile, was moving through the house with purpose, checking windows and doors. "We'll leave everything unlocked for the sheriff," he said. "But first, let's make it look like someone's been living here full time." Understanding his strategy, Dahlia rumpled the bedsheets, left a book open on the side table, and set out dishes on the kitchen table as if a meal had been interrupted. Blake stoked the fire in the hearth. ensuring a steady plume of smoke would rise from the chimney. "That should do it," he said finally. "Let's go." They rode hard for Blake's ranch, pushing their horses as much as they dared in the afternoon heat. Dahlia clung to her saddle, grateful for the riding lessons Blake had given her. Her heart pounded with fear, not just for herself but for her newfound home. Would it still be standing when this was over? Or would she lose her inheritance before she'd even had a proper chance to claim it? As they crested the ridge that led to Blake's property, Dahlia cast one last look over her shoulder. In the distance, she could see her uncle's house, standing stalwart against the backdrop of the hills. Somehow, in just these few short weeks, it had become precious to her, a symbol of the new life she was building. "It will be all right," Blake said, catching her glance. "The sheriff knows what he's doing." "I hope you're right," Dahlia replied, turning to face forward again. "I've only just found my place here. I'm not ready to lose it." Blake's expression softened. "You won't lose it, I promise." As they approached Blake's ranch, Dahlia was relieved to see several of his ranch hands moving about the property, going about their normal duties. The sight of the solid house, with smoke rising peacefully from its chimney, offered a momentary sense of safety. Mrs. Wilkins hurried out onto the porch as they dismounted, her normally composed features creased with worry. "Blake, Dahlia." Doc Wilson stopped by on his way to town. "He told me what's happening." "We're fine, Mrs. Wilkins," Blake assured her, helping Dahlia down from her horse. "But we'll have company tonight. I'm sending 2 of my men to the Turner place to back up the sheriff, and I want the rest on alert here." "Of course," the housekeeper agreed. "I'll prepare extra food. Those men will be hungry if they've been riding all day." As Mrs. Wilkins bustled back inside, Blake turned to Dahlia. "You should rest. It's been a trying day, and there's nothing more we can do now except wait." Dahlia shook her head. "I couldn't possibly rest. Not with everything that's happening." Blake studied her for a moment, then nodded in understanding. "Then help Mrs. Wilkins. Keeping busy will help." It was good advice. Dahlia spent the next few hours in the kitchen, assisting the housekeeper in preparing a hearty stew and fresh bread. The familiar tasks helped calm her nerves, though she couldn't help glancing out the window frequently, half expecting to see the Taggart gang appearing on the horizon. As dusk approached, Blake returned from speaking with his men. "Miguel and Tomas have ridden to your place," he informed Dahlia. "They'll meet the sheriff there and help however they can." "Thank you for sending them," Dahlia said. "I know you need your hands here." "They're good men," Blake said. "Steady under pressure, they'll represent us well." The use of us didn't escape Dahlia's notice. Somehow, in these past weeks, her problems had become their problems, shared concerns that bound them together in ways she was only beginning to understand. They ate supper in the kitchen, the meal quieter than usual. Even Mrs. Wilkins, normally happy to fill silences with cheerful chatter, seemed subdued. The weight of waiting pressed down on all of them. After the dishes were cleared, Blake suggested they move to the front porch. "We'll be able to see anyone approaching," he explained. "And the night air might help clear our heads." The evening was pleasantly cool after the heat of the day, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Under different circumstances, Dahlia would have found it peaceful. Now, however, each sound, a coyote's distant howl, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of the porch swing, set her nerves on edge. "Tell me about St. Louis," Blake said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. Dahlia glanced at him in surprise. "What? St. Louis?" he repeated. "Your life there. What was it like?" Understanding dawned. He was trying to distract her from her worries. Dahlia felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "It was proper," she began, searching for the right words. "Orderly." Days followed a predictable pattern: teaching at the school, Sunday services, occasional socials or lectures. Everything had its place and time. Sounds confining, Blake observed. Dahlia considered this. I never thought of it that way before, but perhaps it was. There were expectations of behavior, of ambition, of one's place in society, especially for women. And here, Blake prompted, how does it compare? A small smile touched Dahlia's lips. Here, I'm learning to ride horses and mend fences. I'm making decisions about cattle and crops. I'm sitting on a porch after dark with a man who isn't my husband or brother, without a chaperone in sight. She chuckled softly. My mother would be scandalized. Blake's eyes crinkled at the corners. So would half the matrons in Cottonwood Springs, I expect. But that's just it, Dahlia continued, warming to the subject. Here, there's space to be more than what society dictates. There's room to breathe, to discover what I'm truly capable of. And what have you discovered so far? Blake asked, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. Dahlia met his gaze in the lamplight. That I'm stronger than I knew, that I can learn new skills, face new challenges, that I don't have to be afraid of the unknown. You've always had that strength, Blake said. You just needed the chance to find it. There was something in his expression, admiration, certainly, but something more that made Dahlia's breath catch. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, sitting close on the porch swing, the night wrapping around them like a protective cloak. The sound of approaching riders shattered the moment. Blake was on his feet instantly, hand going to his gun. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving to the edge of the porch. Dahlia's heart hammered as she rose to stand behind him. In the moonlight, she could make out 3 riders approaching at a steady pace, not the hurried gallop of men being pursued. "It's Miguel," Blake said after a moment, his posture relaxing slightly. "And Tomas. And that looks like Sheriff Rawlins with them." Relief flooded through Dahlia. If the sheriff was here, perhaps the danger had passed. Unless— "My house," she whispered. "Is it? We'll know soon enough," Blake said, his hand finding hers and giving it a reassuring squeeze. The riders came to a halt in front of the house, and Sheriff Rawlins dismounted with a weary groan. He was a tall man with a weathered face and salt and pepper hair, his badge glinting in the moonlight. "Blake," he called up to the porch. "Miss Turner." "Sheriff," Blake acknowledged. "Any news?" Rawlins ascended the porch steps, removing his hat as he did so. "The Taggart gang crossed Turner land about an hour after you left," he reported. "We tracked them to the foothills, but lost the trail when they entered the rocky terrain. They're holed up somewhere in the high country, but with night falling, we had to call off the search." "And my property?" Dahlia asked anxiously. "Did they damage anything?" The sheriff shook his head. "They didn't stop. Rode straight through, heading for the hills. Your place is fine, Miss Turner." The tension drained from Dahlia's body so suddenly that she might have swayed if Blake hadn't still been holding her hand. "Thank God," she breathed. "We've left men watching the main trails out of the hills," Rawlins continued. "If they try to come back down, we'll know. But my guess is they'll lie low for a while. That wounded man will slow them down. You're welcome to rest here before heading back to town," Blake offered. "Mrs. Wilkins has food prepared." "Much obliged," the sheriff said, "but I should get back. Just wanted to let you know the situation personally, especially given Miss Turner's stake in all this." After the sheriff had departed, declining all but a quick cup of coffee for the road, Blake turned to Dahlia. "You should be able to return to your property tomorrow. It seems the immediate danger has passed." Dahlia nodded, though a small part of her felt an unexpected reluctance at the thought of leaving Blake's ranch. These past weeks, it had become a kind of home to her, a safe haven in a new and sometimes frightening world. "You'll still help me with the cattle?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Blake's expression softened. Of course. I gave my word, didn't I? Just because you're moving back to your own place doesn't mean you're on your own, Dahlia. The use of her first name, now familiar between them, brought comfort. Thank you, Blake. That night, as Dahlia prepared for bed in the guest room that had been hers these past weeks, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed since her arrival in Cottonwood Springs. She had come west seeking a fresh start, never imagining the dangers and challenges she would face. But neither had she anticipated the friendships she would form, the strength she would discover within herself, or the unexpected feelings that were growing for the quiet, steadfast man who had promised she would never fear again. Tomorrow, she would return to her uncle's house, her house now, and take another step toward claiming the life she had come west to build. But she would do so knowing she wasn't alone, and that knowledge made all the difference. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of the tension that had gripped them the previous day. After breakfast, Blake and Dahlia rode to her property, accompanied by Miguel, who would help them begin preparations for bringing the cattle back. As they crested the ridge and her uncle's her ranch came into view, Dahlia felt a surge of emotion. The modest house with its wide porch, the barn and corral, the sweep of grassland stretching to the foothills, all of it was now truly hers in a way it hadn't been before. She had defended it, worried over it, begun to make it her own. It looks peaceful, she observed as they approached. The land abides, Blake said simply. It's seen worse than the Taggart gang in its time. The house was just as they had left it, though signs of the sheriff's presence remained: coffee cups on the kitchen table, boot prints on the porch. Dahlia moved through the rooms, touching furniture and belongings with new appreciation. I'll start getting things ready for the cattle, Miguel said after they had unsaddled the horses. The corral needs some work before they arrive. As the ranch hands set off toward the outbuildings, Dahlia turned to Blake. When should we bring them back? The cattle, I mean. I've sent word to John Henderson, Blake replied. He can have them ready by tomorrow. With Miguel's help and a couple of my other hands, we can drive them over in the morning. Dahlia nodded, trying to hide her nervousness at the prospect of suddenly being responsible for 30 head of cattle. And you'll show me what to do, how to care for them. Every step of the way, Blake assured her. He hesitated, then added, I was thinking, it might be wise to have Miguel stay here with you for a while, just until we're certain the Taggart gang has moved on for good. You mean, live here? Dahlia asked, surprised. In the bunkhouse, Blake clarified quickly. It's small but serviceable. Your uncle used to hire seasonal help during calving and branding. Miguel's experienced and he can teach you a great deal about cattle raising. Dahlia considered the suggestion. Having someone else on the property would certainly ease her concerns about safety, and the practical assistance would be invaluable as she learned to manage the ranch. If he's willing, I would be grateful for the help, she decided, but I insist on paying him properly. Blake nodded approvingly. I'll speak with him, and yes, you should establish a proper employment arrangement. This is your ranch now, Dahlia. You're the boss. The word sent a small thrill through her. Your ranch. You're the boss. She, Dahlia Turner, former schoolteacher from St. Louis, was now a ranch owner in West Texas. The responsibility was daunting, but also exhilarating. They spent the day preparing for the cattle's arrival, checking fences, clearing the corral of debris, ensuring the water troughs were clean and ready. By mid-afternoon, Dahlia's muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor, but it was a satisfying kind of tiredness. You're getting stronger, Blake observed as they paused for a rest, sitting on the corral fence. Your hands aren't blistering as easily as they did that first week. Dahlia looked down at her palms, once soft and unmarked, now showing the beginnings of calluses. "Mother would be horrified," she said with a small laugh. "She always insisted I keep my hands soft and feminine." "They're still feminine," Blake said, his voice dropping slightly, "just stronger now. Like the rest of you." Something in his tone made Dahlia look up, and she found him watching her with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through her. For a moment, neither spoke, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Miguel called from the barn, breaking the moment. "Mr. Jameson, I found some tack that needs repair before we can use it for the drive tomorrow." Blake cleared his throat and slid down from the fence. "I'd better see to that. You should rest a bit longer." As he walked toward the barn, Dahlia remained perched on the fence, her thoughts in turmoil. The way Blake had looked at her just now, it confirmed what she had begun to suspect in recent days. His feelings for her were evolving beyond mere neighborly concern or even friendship, and her own feelings. Dahlia wasn't naive. She recognized the flutter in her stomach when Blake entered a room, the way she found herself watching for his smile, the comfort she took in his presence. She was falling for him, had perhaps been falling since that first night in his barn when he had promised she would never fear again. But was this wise? She had come west to build an independent life, to discover who she could be outside the constraints of St. Louis society. Becoming entangled with Blake Jameson, no matter how honorable and kind he might be, could complicate that journey of self-discovery. And yet, the thought of not exploring these feelings, of keeping Blake at arm's length, left her with an emptiness she couldn't ignore. By the time Blake returned from the barn, Dahlia had made no decisions, but she had acknowledged the truth of her situation. She was developing deep feelings for Blake Jameson. What came of those feelings would depend on many factors, not least of which was whether Blake himself wished to pursue something more than friendship. "All set," Blake announced. "Miguel has everything under control in the barn. He's agreed to stay on, by the way. Says he's looking forward to working for you." "That's a relief," Dahlia said sincerely. "I have so much to learn, and having someone experienced here will make a tremendous difference." "You'll pick it up quickly," Blake assured her. "You've already learned more in a few weeks than most city folks would in months." "I have a good teacher," Dahlia said, echoing her words from the day before. Blake's smile was warm, touching his eyes in a way that made them crinkle at the corners. "It helps to have a willing student." As the afternoon waned into evening, they continued working, preparing the ranch for its new beginning. When it was time for Blake to leave, Dahlia walked him to his horse, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "Miguel will sleep in the bunkhouse tonight," Blake said as he tightened his saddle girth. "He knows to keep watch, just in case, but I don't think you have anything to worry about." "I'll be fine," Dahlia assured him, though part of her wished he would stay. Blake hesitated, then said, "I'll be back at first light with the men. We'll bring your cattle home." "I'll have coffee waiting," Dahlia promised. He mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life in the saddle. Looking down at her, his expression grew serious. "Dahlia, I'm proud of you. Not everyone would have the courage to do what you're doing, starting over in a new place, taking on responsibilities you never trained for. It speaks to your character." The words warmed her more than any compliment about her appearance ever had. "Thank you, Blake. That means a great deal coming from you." For a moment, it seemed he might say more. But then he simply tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away, the setting sun casting his silhouette in gold as he crested the ridge. Dahlia watched until he disappeared from view, a mixture of emotions swirling within her. Anticipation for tomorrow's cattle drive, nervousness about her first night alone in her new home, Miguel's presence in the bunkhouse notwithstanding. And beneath it all, a growing certainty that her life was becoming irrevocably entwined with Blake Jameson's, in ways she hadn't anticipated but couldn't and didn't want to prevent. With a sigh that was part contentment, part trepidation, Dahlia turned back toward the house. Her house. The center of her new life. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she would face it with the strength she was discovering within herself, a strength that Blake had recognized before she herself had known it was there. True to his word, Blake arrived at first light, accompanied by 4 of his ranch hands. Dahlia, who had been up since before dawn preparing coffee and a simple breakfast of biscuits and bacon, greeted them on the porch. "Morning, Miss Turner," one of the hands called cheerfully. "Ready to meet your cattle?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Dahlia replied with a smile, though her stomach fluttered with nervousness. After a quick breakfast, they set out for the Henderson ranch, Blake riding beside Dahlia while the hands spread out around them. The morning was crisp and clear, with the promise of heat to come as the sun rose higher. "John Henderson is a good man," Blake told her as they rode. "Been ranching in these parts for 30 years. He and your uncle were friends, though they had their share of disagreements over the years." "What sort of disagreements?" Dahlia asked curiously. Blake's lips twitched. "Mostly about cattle breeding. Your uncle favored Herefords while John swears by his Longhorns. They debate it for hours over whiskey on John's porch." The image of her reserved uncle engaged in passionate debates about cattle breeding made Dahlia smile. "I wish I had known him better." "You're more like him than you might realize," Blake observed. He had the same determined look you get when you're tackling something new. The Henderson ranch was larger than Dahlia's property, with a sprawling main house and several outbuildings. John Henderson himself came out to meet them, a tall, lean man with a shock of white hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime under the Texas sun. "So you're Samuel's niece," he said, looking Dahlia up and down with frank curiosity. "He spoke highly of you." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Henderson," Dahlia replied, "and I'm deeply grateful for your care of my uncle's cattle these past months." Henderson waved away her thanks. "Neighborly duty. Samuel would have done the same for me." He turned to Blake. "You ready to move them out? They're penned up and waiting." "Ready when you are," Blake confirmed. What followed was an education for Dahlia. The men moved with practiced efficiency, guiding the cattle out of the Henderson pens and onto the trail that would lead them back to the Turner ranch. Blake stayed close to Dahlia, explaining the process and guiding her on how to position herself and her horse. "Keep them bunched but not too tight," he instructed. "Too much pressure and they get nervous. Too little and they scatter." It was challenging work, requiring constant attention and quick reactions. Dahlia's riding skills were put to the test as she helped maintain the herd's direction, following Blake's guidance and watching the more experienced hands for cues. By midday, they had the cattle moving steadily toward her ranch. Dahlia's back ached and her thighs burned from hours in the saddle, but she felt a growing confidence in her ability to handle her horse and influence the herd's movement. "You're a natural," Blake said as they paused on a rise, watching the cattle stream through a narrow valley below them. Most first-timers would have turned back by now. "I'm too stubborn for that," Dahlia replied with a tired smile. "Besides, these are my cattle now. I need to know how to handle them." Blake's expression softened. "Your uncle would be proud. He always hoped his place would stay in the family." The last leg of the journey was the most challenging, as they had to guide the cattle through the gate and into the Turner ranch's main pasture. Dahlia held her breath as the lead animals approached the opening, praying they wouldn't balk or scatter. Under the skilled guidance of Blake and his men, however, the herd flowed smoothly through the gate and spread out into the familiar pasture many of them had been born in. Watching them settle into grazing, Dahlia felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced before. "We did it," she breathed, turning to Blake with a wide smile. "They're home." "You did it," Blake corrected, his own smile matching hers. "This is just the beginning, Dahlia. There's still much to learn: feeding routines, health checks, preparing for calving season, but you've taken the first step." The pride in his voice warmed her more than the afternoon sun. "I couldn't have done it without you. You would have found a way," Blake said confidently. "But I'm glad I could be here to see it." As the hands began riding back to Blake's ranch, having completed their task, Blake lingered. "Miguel will show you the daily routine," he said. "But if you have questions or need anything at all—" "I know where to find you," Dahlia finished for him. There was a moment of silence between them, filled with things unsaid. Then Blake reached out and, with a gentleness that belied his strength, tucked a stray strand of hair behind Dahlia's ear. The brief touch sent shivers across her skin. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said, his voice lower than usual, "to check on how you're settling in with the herd." "I'd like that," Dahlia replied softly. As Blake rode away, Dahlia stood watching her cattle graze on land that was now truly hers in every sense. The challenges ahead were still numerous, the learning curve steep. But for the first time since arriving in West Texas, she felt not just determined but confident in her ability to build the life she wanted here, and in the knowledge that she wasn't facing that challenge alone. The next weeks fell into a rhythm as Dahlia adjusted to life as a cattle rancher. Each day brought new lessons, some learned from Miguel, others from Blake during his frequent visits, and many from trial and error. She learned to recognize signs of illness in the cattle, to mend fences efficiently, to predict weather changes from the feel of the air and the behavior of animals. The physical demands of ranch life transformed her body. Her hands grew calloused, her arms stronger, her skin tanned by the relentless Texas sun. The fine dresses she had brought from St. Louis remained largely unworn, replaced by practical skirts and blouses that allowed her to move freely as she worked. Blake came by almost daily, sometimes to help with specific tasks, other times simply to check on her progress. Their relationship evolved with each visit, growing deeper and more comfortable. They would often share the evening meal, sitting on her porch as twilight settled over the land, talking of everything and nothing. It was during one such evening, about a month after the cattle had been returned to her ranch, that Blake broached a subject they had both been carefully avoiding. "The Founders' Day celebration is next weekend," he said as they finished the apple pie Mrs. Wilkins had sent with him. "Biggest social event of the year in Cottonwood Springs." "So I've heard," Dahlia replied. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned it when she visited last week. Apparently there's a dance." Blake nodded, suddenly seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "There is, and I was wondering. That is, I hoped you might consider attending, with me." Dahlia's heart quickened. This was more than a casual invitation, they both knew it. In a small town like Cottonwood Springs, attending a social event as a couple made a statement. "I'd be honored," she said softly. "Though I should warn you, my dancing skills are decidedly Eastern. I may not know the steps to your Western dances." Blake's smile returned, relief evident in his expression. "I'm not much of a dancer myself, but I'd be proud to escort you, dancing or no." The week leading up to the celebration passed in a flurry of activity. Dahlia retrieved one of her finer dresses from her trunk, relieved to find it relatively unwrinkled after its long confinement. Mrs. Henderson, who had become something of a mentor to Dahlia in social matters as Miguel was in ranching, invited her over for tea and filled her in on what to expect at the celebration. "It's quite the affair," the older woman explained. "Starts with a community picnic at noon, followed by games and contests. The dance begins at sundown and usually goes till the wee hours. Every family brings food to share. I should bake something, Dahlia mused, though I'm afraid my cooking skills are still rather basic. Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. Your apple cobbler at the church social last Sunday was perfectly acceptable, dear. But if you're worried, stick to something simple. No one will judge you harshly, you're still new to our ways. The day of the celebration dawned clear and pleasant. Dahlia rose early to complete her chores and prepare a batch of cornbread using Mrs. Wilkins' recipe. By mid-morning, she was bathed and dressed in her best gown, a sky-blue creation with delicate lace trim that complemented her dark hair and brought out the color of her eyes. When Blake arrived to escort her to town, his reaction was everything Dahlia could have hoped for. He stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of her on the porch, his eyes widening appreciatively. "Dahlia," he said, removing his hat. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, pleased by his response. "You clean up rather well yourself." It was true. Blake had clearly made an effort for the occasion. His usual work clothes had been replaced by a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and clean trousers. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard. The town square was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Long tables had been set up under the shade of oak trees, laden with every kind of food imaginable. Children ran laughing between the tables, while adults gathered in conversational groups, the men discussing cattle prices and weather predictions, the women exchanging recipes and local news. Dahlia was greeted warmly by those she had met during her month in Cottonwood Springs, and introduced to many she hadn't. Standing beside Blake, feeling his steadying presence at her elbow, she found herself relaxing into the role of newcomer being welcomed into the community. "Miss Turner." "So glad you could join us," Doc Wilson called, making his way through the crowd toward them. "And Blake, you old hermit, didn't expect to see you until the dancing started." "Wouldn't miss it, Doc," Blake replied with a rare grin. "Not with such pleasant company." The doctor's eyes twinkled as he glanced between them. "Indeed. Well, Miss Turner, you've certainly brought some color back to our Blake's cheeks. It's good to see." Dahlia felt her own cheeks warm at the implication, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Rawlins. "Blake, Miss Turner," he greeted them. "Enjoying the festivities?" "Very much, Sheriff," Dahlia replied. "It's a wonderful celebration." "Indeed it is," Rawlins agreed. He hesitated, then added in a lower tone, "I have some news that might interest you both. Mind stepping aside for a moment?" Curious and slightly concerned, Dahlia followed the sheriff and Blake to a quieter spot at the edge of the square. "We got him," Rawlins said without preamble. "Roy Taggart. Caught him trying to rob a stagecoach near El Paso. He's being brought back here to stand trial." "That's excellent news," Blake said. "What about the rest of the gang, scattered according to Taggart?" "After that wounded man died the one who took a bullet during the bank robbery, the gang had a falling out. Some headed for New Mexico territory, others for parts unknown." Relief washed over Dahlia. "So the danger is past. They won't be returning to this area." "Not likely," the sheriff confirmed. "With Taggart in custody and the gang dispersed, I'd say the worst is behind us." The news lifted a weight from Dahlia's shoulders that she hadn't fully acknowledged was there. While she had grown confident in her ability to manage her ranch and had Miguel's presence for security, the knowledge that the Taggart gang might return had been a shadow at the back of her mind. "That calls for celebration," Blake said, his hand finding the small of Dahlia's back in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate. "Shall we join the festivities properly, Miss Turner?" The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur of food, conversation, and laughter. Dahlia found herself drawn into the community in ways she hadn't anticipated. discovering connections with the women of Cottonwood Springs that went beyond mere politeness. They were curious about her Eastern background, yes, but also genuinely interested in her experiences taking over her uncle's ranch. Not many women would have the courage, Mrs. Wilcox, the boarding house owner, commented during the afternoon. Most would have sold up and returned east or looked for a husband to take over the management. I considered selling, Dahlia admitted, but once I saw the place, felt the connection to it, I couldn't bring myself to let it go. Good for you, Mrs. Wilcox said approvingly. Though I notice our Blake Jameson has been keeping a close eye on your progress. The knowing look in the older woman's eyes made Dahlia blush. He's been very helpful. I couldn't have managed without his guidance. Mrs. Wilcox hummed noncommittally. And he couldn't take his eyes off you during dinner. Helpful indeed. As evening approached, the town square was transformed. Lanterns were hung from tree branches, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Tables were moved aside to create space for dancing, and a small band set up on a makeshift stage 2 fiddles, a guitar, and a banjo player. Blake found Dahlia as the first notes of music filled the air. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. "I warned you about my lack of Western dancing skills," Dahlia reminded him with a smile. "Then we'll learn together," Blake replied, his voice warm with affection. The dance was a lively reel that had couples moving in patterns Dahlia had never attempted before. But with Blake's steady guidance and her own willingness to laugh at her mistakes, she soon found herself enjoying the energetic movements. By the third dance, she was breathless with exertion and happiness. "I need a moment to catch my breath," she told Blake as the song ended. "Of course," he agreed. "Some punch, perhaps?" As Blake went to fetch refreshments, Dahlia found a seat at the edge of the dancing area. She watched the couples twirling and stepping in time to the music, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't expected to find so far from her Eastern home. "Miss Turner," a voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I join you?" Looking up, Dahlia saw John Henderson standing beside her, punch cup in hand. "Of course, Mr. Henderson, please." The rancher settled into the chair next to hers, his weathered face thoughtful as he gazed out at the dancers. "You seem to be settling in well," he observed. "Samuel would be pleased." "I hope so," Dahlia replied. "I've tried to honor his memory by taking proper care of the place." "You've done more than that," Henderson said. "You've breathed new life into it, and into our Blake, if I'm not mistaken." Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Jameson has been exceedingly kind in helping me adjust to ranch life." Henderson chuckled. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Exceedingly kind?" His expression sobered slightly. "Blake's a good man, Miss Turner, one of the best I know. He's been alone too long since his father passed. It does my heart good to see him smiling again." Before Dahlia could formulate a response to this frank assessment, Blake returned with 2 cups of punch. "John," he greeted the older rancher, "not dancing tonight." "These old bones don't move like they used to," Henderson replied, rising from his seat. "I'll leave that to you young folks. Miss Turner, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy your evening." As Henderson moved away, Blake handed Dahlia a cup and took the vacated seat beside her. "What was that about?" he asked curiously. John looked uncommonly pleased with himself. "He was just being neighborly," Dahlia replied, unwilling to repeat Henderson's more personal observations, "checking on how I'm adjusting to ranch life." Blake's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he sipped his punch and gazed out at the dancers, a comfortable silence settling between them. As the evening progressed, the music slowed and couples drew closer together on the improvised dance floor. When the band struck up a waltz, a dance Dahlia actually knew well, Blake set aside his empty cup and stood. "One more dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Dahlia placed her hand in his without hesitation. "I'd love to." Unlike the earlier reels and square dances, the waltz required partners to maintain constant contact. Blake's hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her around the floor, his movements surprisingly graceful for a man who claimed not to be much of a dancer. "You've been hiding your talents, Mr. Jameson," Dahlia teased as they completed a perfect turn. "You dance quite well." "My mother insisted I learn," Blake admitted, a soft smile playing at his lips. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." The image made Dahlia laugh. "She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," Blake agreed, his expression turning nostalgic. "Strong, principled kind. You would have liked her, I think, and she would have approved of you." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet certainty, touched Dahlia deeply. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I," Blake said softly. As the waltz continued, Dahlia became increasingly aware of their proximity, the solid warmth of Blake's chest near hers, the gentle pressure of his hand at her waist, the subtle scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him. When she glanced up and met his gaze, the intensity she found there took her breath away. "Dahlia," Blake said, his voice barely audible above the music, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you, to ask you, really." Dahlia's heart quickened. "Yes." But before Blake could continue, the music ended, and a loud voice called for everyone's attention. The mayor of Cottonwood Springs, a portly man with an impressive mustache, had taken to the small stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "as is tradition at our Founders' Day celebration, it's time to recognize those who have contributed to our community over the past year." A series of small acknowledgments followed the teacher whose students had all passed their year-end examinations, the blacksmith who had repaired the church bell free of charge, the women's auxiliary who had raised funds for a new schoolhouse roof. "And finally," the mayor continued, "we would like to welcome our newest property owner, Miss Dahlia Turner, who has taken over her late uncle's ranch and, by all accounts, is making a fine go of it. Miss Turner, would you please step forward?" Startled, Dahlia glanced at Blake, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he murmured. "It's their way of officially welcoming you to the community." With butterflies in her stomach, Dahlia made her way through the crowd to the stage, conscious of all eyes upon her. The mayor presented her with a small certificate, which she accepted with murmured thanks. "Would you like to say a few words?" the mayor prompted. Dahlia hadn't prepared anything, but looking out at the faces of those who had welcomed her so warmly over the past month, Mrs. Henderson, Doc Wilson, Sheriff Rollins, and, standing at the back, Blake, she found the words came easily. "I came to Cottonwood Springs as a stranger," she began, "seeking only to claim an inheritance. What I found instead was a community, neighbors who have shown me kindness, patience, and generosity beyond anything I could have expected. I may have been born in the East, but I hope to make my home here among you for many years to come. Thank you for welcoming me so warmly." The simple speech was met with applause and approving nods. As Dahlia stepped down from the stage, she was surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and reiterating their welcome. By the time she made her way back to Blake, the band had struck up another lively tune, and the dancing had resumed. He was watching her with a mixture of pride and something deeper, more profound. "That was a fine speech," he said as she reached his side. "And every word true." "I meant what I said," Dahlia told him. "This place, these people, they've become important to me in ways I never anticipated." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. The land has a way of claiming you once you open yourself to it. And the people who love this land recognize a kindred spirit when they see one. The music and dancing continued well into the night, but as the hour grew late, Dahlia found herself tiring. The day had been long and emotionally rich, filled with new experiences and deepening connections. "Ready to head home?" Blake asked, noticing her stifled yawn. "If you wouldn't mind," Dahlia admitted. "It's been a wonderful day, but dawn comes early and the cattle don't care if we've been dancing half the night," Blake finished with a smile. "I understand completely." They said their goodbyes to friends and neighbors, receiving knowing smiles and warm wishes for the journey home. As they drove away from town in Blake's wagon, the sounds of music and laughter fading behind them, a comfortable silence settled between them. The night was clear, the stars spread like diamonds across the velvet sky. Dahlia leaned back slightly, gazing up at the constellations that seemed so much brighter and closer here than they had in St. Louis. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Blake said softly, following her gaze. "That's one thing I never tire of our Texas sky. It's magnificent," Dahlia agreed. "So vast and clear it makes one feel both small and somehow significant all at once." Blake glanced at her, surprise and appreciation in his expression. "That's exactly it. Most people don't understand that dual feeling." "I didn't before coming here," Dahlia admitted. "In the city, the sky is just there, something above but not really part of your world. Here, it's impossible to ignore. It's present in everything you do. Like the land itself," Blake observed. "It shapes us, whether we recognize it or not." They fell silent again, each lost in thought as the wagon rumbled along the familiar road toward Dahlia's ranch. When they crested the final ridge and her house came into view, nestled against the backdrop of the foothills, Dahlia felt a surge of emotion, pride, contentment, and a deep sense of belonging. Blake helped her down from the wagon when they reached the house, his hands strong and sure at her waist. But instead of releasing her immediately, he let his hands linger, his gaze meeting hers in the moonlight. "Dahlia," he said, his voice low and serious, "before we were interrupted at the dance, there was something I wanted to ask you." Dahlia's heart quickened. "Yes." "These past weeks, watching you build a life here, seeing your strength and determination, it's made me realize something." Blake paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've lived on my own land, worked my own cattle for years now. It's a good life, but a solitary one. Until you arrived, I didn't fully understand what was missing." He took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of hard work. "I find myself thinking of you when we're apart. Wondering how your day is going, if you're facing challenges I could help with, if you're watching the same sunset I am." "Blake," Dahlia whispered, her voice catching with emotion. "I'm not a man of fancy words," he continued, "but I know my own heart. And it's telling me that what I feel for you is more than friendship, more than neighborly concern. It's telling me that I'm falling in love with you, Dahlia Turner." The simple, direct declaration stole Dahlia's breath. In St. Louis, suitors had courted her with carefully rehearsed compliments and studied gestures. Blake's straightforward honesty was worth more to her than all those Eastern niceties combined. "I don't expect an answer tonight," Blake added quickly. "I know this might seem sudden, but I wanted you to know the truth of my feelings, and to ask if you might consider, if there might be a chance that someday you could feel the same." Dahlia's heart swelled with emotion. The truth was, she had already been examining her own feelings during the quiet evenings alone in her house, and had come to a similar conclusion. What had begun as gratitude for Blake's help had evolved into respect, then affection, and finally something deeper and more profound. "Blake," she said softly, "I don't need time to consider. The truth is, I've been falling in love with you too. From that first night when you found me in your barn and promised I would never fear again, a promise you've kept in more ways than you know." The hope that dawned in Blake's eyes was like watching the sunrise. "Truly, truly," Dahlia confirmed. "This new life I'm building, you've become an essential part of it, not because I need your help, though I'm grateful for it, but because I need you. Your strength, your kindness, your steady presence." Blake's hands tightened around hers. "Dahlia," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "may I kiss you?" The request, so proper and yet so intimate, made Dahlia smile. "Yes," she whispered. "Please." Blake released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Dahlia had never been more certain of anything in her life. She closed the remaining distance between them, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was tender at first, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as Blake drew her closer. Dahlia's arms wound around his neck, her body fitting against his as if they had been designed as two halves of a whole. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Blake admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "Why didn't you?" Dahlia asked, her voice teasing despite the emotion of the moment. "I needed to be sure," Blake replied seriously. "Sure that what I was feeling was real and not just admiration for your courage. Sure that you were settled here, committed to this life. Sure that I could offer you a future worth having. And now, are you sure?" Blake's smile was warm in the moonlight. "More sure than I've ever been of anything." He straightened slightly, though he kept her within the circle of his arms. "I'm not asking for promises tonight, Dahlia, only permission to court you properly, to see if what we both feel can grow into something lasting." Dahlia's heart felt full to bursting. "Yes," she said simply, "I would like that very much." Their second kiss was briefer but no less sweet. When they parted, Blake reluctantly stepped back. "I should go. It's late and we both have early mornings ahead." "Will I see you tomorrow?" Dahlia asked. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Blake promised. "I'll come by after the morning chores." As Blake climbed back into his wagon, Dahlia stood on her porch, watching him go with a heart lighter than it had been in years. The path ahead might still hold challenges. Running a ranch was never easy, and building a relationship had its own complexities, but for the first time, she felt truly certain that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Inside her house, her home, Dahlia moved through the familiar rooms with a new awareness. This place that had once belonged to her uncle, that she had claimed as her own, now held the promise of a different kind of future than she had initially imagined. Not a solitary life of independence, but one shared with a man who respected her strength, even as he offered his own in support. As she prepared for bed, Dahlia's thoughts returned to the night she had first arrived in Cottonwood Springs, frightened, alone, hiding from outlaws in a stranger's barn. How far she had come since then, how much she had learned and grown, and how fortunate she was that it had been Blake Jameson who found her that night, who had promised she would never fear again. It was a promise he had kept, not by shielding her from all danger or difficulty, but by believing in her ability to face challenges and overcome them. By standing beside her, not in front of her. By seeing her not as someone to be protected, but as a partner to be supported. That, Dahlia realized as she drifted toward sleep, was the truest form of love, not possession or control, but mutual respect and shared strength. And it was what she and Blake were building together, day by day, under the vast Texas sky. The following weeks passed in a golden haze for Dahlia. The rhythm of ranch life continued, cattle to tend, fences to mend, crops to nurture, but now there was the added sweetness of Blake's courtship. He came by almost daily, sometimes to help with chores, other times simply to spend time with her. They would ride the property boundaries together, share meals on her porch, or sit talking late into the evening as the stars emerged overhead. With Miguel's continued presence in the bunkhouse, there was no impropriety in these visits, though Dahlia sometimes caught the ranch hand's knowing smile when Blake arrived. The community of Cottonwood Springs seemed equally approving of the developing relationship Mrs. Henderson in particular made a point of telling Dahlia how pleased she was to see two good people finding happiness together. As summer waned into early autumn, Blake began including Dahlia in the management discussions for his own ranch. "I value your perspective," he told her when she expressed surprise at being asked her opinion on cattle prices. "You see things differently, coming from outside. Fresh eyes notice what those of us who have been here forever might miss." It was during one such discussion, as they sat at Blake's kitchen table reviewing ledgers while Mrs. Wilkins prepared supper, that Blake broached a new subject. "I've been thinking," he said, setting aside a page of calculations. "Your ranch and mine share a boundary to the west." "Yes," Dahlia agreed, wondering where this observation was leading. "The creek that runs through your property continues onto mine. It's a good water source for both our herds." "It is," Dahlia said, still puzzled. "Is there a problem with it?" "Not a problem," Blake said carefully. "An opportunity, perhaps. I've been considering expanding my herd next spring. With beef prices rising, it makes sense to increase production." "That seems wise," Dahlia commented, "though I confess I'm not sure what this has to do with our shared boundary." Blake met her gaze directly. "What would you think about combining our operations? Not immediately, but perhaps in the future. Your Herefords and my mixed herd together. We could run them as one unit, share resources, divide the profits accordingly." Dahlia considered the proposal. From a purely business perspective, it made sound sense. Economies of scale would reduce costs for both of them, and Blake's experience combined with her fresh ideas could potentially increase profitability for both ranches. But she sensed there was more to the suggestion than mere economics. "This sounds like a significant partnership you're proposing," she said carefully. "It could be," Blake agreed, "if that's something you might be interested in exploring." Before Dahlia could respond, Mrs. Wilkins called them to supper, and the conversation was temporarily set aside. But as they ate, Dahlia found her thoughts returning to Blake's proposal. Was he simply suggesting a business arrangement? Or was there a deeper meaning to his words, a tentative step toward a more personal partnership? After the meal, Blake suggested a walk. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. They strolled in comfortable silence for a time, eventually stopping by a large oak tree that offered a view across Blake's property, and in the distance, the outline of Dahlia's ranch against the darkening sky. "About what I suggested earlier," Blake began, turning to face her. "I realize it might have seemed abrupt." "Not abrupt," Dahlia assured him. "Just unexpected. I'm still learning to manage my own ranch. The thought of combining operations is a significant step." Blake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right, of course. It's too soon for such decisions. I didn't mean to rush you." "You haven't," Dahlia said quickly. "And I'm not dismissing the idea. It has merit from a practical standpoint. I just want to be sure I understand exactly what you're proposing." Blake's gaze was steady as he took her hands in his. "What I'm proposing, Dahlia, is a future where we work together in all ways, where your land and mine become ours. Where we build something lasting, not just for ourselves but for those who might come after us." The implication was clear, and Dahlia's heart quickened. "Blake, are you asking me to marry you?" "Not yet," he said softly, "but I want you to know that's where my thoughts are leading. That when I look at the future, I see you in it as my partner, my wife, the mother of my children. If that's a future you could want too." Dahlia felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "It is," she whispered. "It's a future I've begun to imagine for myself as well." Relief and happiness spread across Blake's features. "Then we're of the same mind. We'll take our time, do things properly. But knowing we're working toward the same goal, that means everything to me." "To me as well," Dahlia agreed. As Blake gathered her into his arms, Dahlia reflected on how far she had come from the frightened woman who had hidden in a stranger's barn that first night in Texas. She had found not just a home or a livelihood, but a community, a purpose, and now the promise of a love that would sustain her through whatever challenges the future might hold. The autumn months brought a flurry of activity to both ranches as they prepared for winter. Blake taught Dahlia about harvesting and storing hay, protecting vulnerable animals from the occasional cold snaps, and maintaining equipment that would be essential when spring returned. She proved an apt pupil, her confidence growing with each new skill mastered. Their courtship continued to deepen, with Blake now a regular presence at Dahlia's dinner table and she at his. The people of Cottonwood Springs had long since accepted them as a couple, treating them with the easy familiarity reserved for established pairs. "When's the wedding?" became a common teasing question when they appeared together at church or town events. Blake would smile and reply that some things couldn't be rushed, while Dahlia would blush and change the subject. But privately, they had begun to discuss the possibility in more concrete terms. "Spring would be ideal," Blake suggested one evening as they sat by the fire in Dahlia's parlor. "After calving season but before the summer heat. April, perhaps." "April," Dahlia repeated, testing the word. "That would give us time to prepare properly. And the wildflowers would be blooming. They'd make beautiful decorations for the church." Blake smiled, pleased by her enthusiastic response. "So it's settled. April it is." Dahlia hesitated. "Blake, you haven't actually asked me yet, you know. Formally, I mean." He laughed, the sound warm in the cozy room. "You're right. I've been presumptuous, but I wanted to be sure everything was in order before I did." "In order?" Dahlia asked, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I've been working on something," Blake admitted. "A surprise of sorts. It's nearly ready, and when it is, well, that's when I plan to ask properly." Curiosity burned in Dahlia, but she could see from Blake's expression that he wouldn't be persuaded to reveal more. "Very well," she said with mock severity. "I shall endeavor to be patient." The mystery remained unsolved through November and into December, as winter settled over the Texas landscape. Though milder than the winters Dahlia had known in St. Louis, the season still brought chilly temperatures and occasional frost that transformed the grasslands into crystalline beauty. Christmas approached, bringing with it preparations for the holiday celebrations. The community of Cottonwood Springs embraced the season wholeheartedly, with homes and businesses decorated in evergreen boughs and red ribbons. The church organized a pageant and carols singing, while families exchanged visits and small gifts on Christmas Eve. Blake arrived at Dahlia's ranch earlier than expected, a hint of nervous excitement in his manner. "Dress warmly," he instructed. "I have something to show you." "Is this the mysterious surprise you've been so secretive about?" Dahlia asked as she donned her coat and gloves. Blake smiled enigmatically. "Perhaps. You'll have to come and see." He helped her into his wagon, which had been equipped with extra blankets against the December chill. As they set off, Dahlia realized they were heading not toward town or Blake's ranch, but along the boundary line where their properties met. "Where are we going?" she asked, curiosity mounting. "You'll see," Blake replied, his expression a mixture of anticipation and something that looked almost like anxiety. They traveled for about 20 minutes, following the creek that served both their ranches until they came to a clearing surrounded by oak trees. There, nestled against the backdrop of the hills, stood a structure Dahlia had never seen before, a house, newly built, its raw lumber gleaming in the winter sunlight. Blake drew the wagon to a halt and helped Dahlia down, watching her face closely as she took in the sight before her. "Blake," she breathed. "What is this?" "Come see," he said, taking her hand and leading her toward the house. It was larger than her current home, but not ostentatious, a practical, well-proportioned dwelling with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. The windows were larger than was common in older homes, promising light-filled rooms within. A stone chimney rose from the center of the roof, and neat steps led up to the front door. "It's beautiful," Dahlia said as they climbed the steps. "But I don't understand. Is this on your land or mine?" "Both," Blake replied, opening the door for her. "It sits exactly on the boundary line, half on Turner land, half on Jameson land." The significance of this arrangement wasn't lost on Dahlia. "A house in between," she murmured, "belonging to both properties." "Or uniting them," Blake suggested softly. The interior was spacious and thoughtfully designed. A large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with ample workspace, and doorways leading to what Dahlia assumed were bedrooms. The floors were polished wood, the walls freshly plastered but not yet painted. "It's not quite finished," Blake explained as they moved through the rooms. "There's still painting to be done, furnishings to select. I hoped you might want to make those choices, to make it truly ours." "Ours," Dahlia repeated, her heart swelling with emotion. "Blake, how long have you been planning this?" "Since the day you agreed to let me court you," he admitted. "I knew then what I wanted our future to be. But I needed to create something tangible, something that represented the life I was asking you to share." In the largest bedroom, Blake had placed a single piece of furniture, a beautiful wooden rocking chair, its surfaces sanded smooth and polished to a warm glow. "I made this," he said, his voice suddenly shy. "For you, for when the time comes that you might need it." Dahlia ran her hand over the chair's curved arm, understanding its purpose, a mother's chair, for nursing and soothing babies yet to be born. The thought brought tears to her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "All of it is perfect." Blake took her hands in his expression solemn. "Dahlia Turner, from the moment you came into my life, frightened but determined, seeking shelter but capable of standing on your own, you've changed my world. You've brought laughter and purpose and love where there was only duty and work before." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I promised you that night in the barn that you would never fear again. Now I want to make another promise, that if you'll have me as your husband, I'll spend every day of our lives building a home and a family worthy of your courage and your heart." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box. Opening it, he revealed a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," Blake explained. "My father gave it to her when he asked her to come west with him and start a new life. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right woman to wear it, waiting for you, though I didn't know it then." Tears flowed freely down Dahlia's cheeks now. "Blake Jameson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I would be honored to be your wife, to share this home and our lands, to build a family and a future with you." Blake's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Rising to his feet, he gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their shared tomorrows. When they finally parted, Dahlia laughed through her tears. "This is quite the Christmas gift, Mr. Jameson. The first of many, Mrs. Jameson to be," Blake replied, his smile brighter than she had ever seen it. "The first of many." They spent the afternoon exploring the house in detail, with Blake explaining his choices for the layout and construction. Dahlia offered suggestions for finishes and furnishings, already envisioning the life they would build within these walls. "The house should be complete by March," Blake said as they finally prepared to leave. "In time for an April wedding, if that still suits you." "It suits me perfectly," Dahlia assured him. "Though I'm not sure how I'll manage to keep this a secret until then. I want to tell everyone." "Then let's tell them," Blake suggested. "Starting with Mrs. Wilkins and Miguel tonight. They're expecting us for Christmas Eve supper at my place." The celebrations that followed were joyous indeed. Mrs. Wilkins wept happy tears when they shared their news, while Miguel offered hearty congratulations and insisted on opening a bottle of special tequila he had been saving for an important occasion. In the days that followed, they announced their engagement to the community of Cottonwood Springs, receiving warm wishes and genuine happiness from those who had watched their relationship develop. Doc Wilson declared himself not the least bit surprised, but thoroughly delighted, while the Hendersons immediately began planning an engagement party. Winter passed in a flurry of preparations for the wedding, for the completion of their new home, and for the merging of their ranching operations. Dahlia threw herself into learning everything she could about cattle breeding and management, determined to be a true partner to Blake in all aspects of their life together. For his part, Blake proved endlessly patient and supportive, answering her questions, valuing her insights, and never once suggesting that her ideas were less valid because of her relative inexperience. "You see things I miss," he told her more than once. "Together, we make better decisions than either of us would alone." As winter yielded to spring, the new house was completed. Dahlia and Blake spent increasing amounts of time there, furnishing it room by room with a mixture of pieces from both their homes and new items purchased specially. The rocking chair took pride of place in what would be their bedroom, a symbol of the family they hoped to create. April arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the Texas landscape, painting the hills and valleys in vibrant blues, yellows, and reds. The wedding date was set for the third Saturday of the month after the most demanding work of calving season, but before the full heat of summer descended. On the morning of her wedding day, Dahlia woke in her uncle's house, though not for much longer feeling a profound sense of rightness. The path that had led her here, from St. Louis schoolteacher to Texas rancher to Blake Jameson's bride, had been unexpected but perfect in its way. Mrs. Henderson and several other women from town arrived to help her prepare, bringing flowers for her hair and sharing advice both practical and sentimental. Dahlia's wedding dress, ordered from a dressmaker in San Antonio, was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace trim, suitable for a bride of her age and circumstances. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson said as she arranged the last flower in Dahlia's upswept hair. "Blake won't know what hit him." "I can hardly believe this day is finally here," Dahlia admitted, smoothing the silk of her skirt. "Sometimes it feels like I've been waiting for it my whole life, and other times it seems like just yesterday that I arrived here, frightened and alone." "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," the older woman observed wisely. "The trick is recognizing the good ones when they come along. You did that with Blake, and he with you." The small church in Cottonwood Springs was filled to capacity when Dahlia arrived. It seemed the entire community had turned out to witness the union of two people who had come to hold a special place in their collective heart. Doc Wilson, who had been like a father to Dahlia since her arrival, offered to walk her down the aisle. "Your uncle would have been proud to do it," he told her, "but since he can't be here, I'd be honored to stand in his place." "I would like that very much," Dahlia replied, touched by the gesture. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. When Dahlia entered the church on Doc Wilson's arm, her eyes immediately found Blake waiting for her at the altar. He stood tall and straight in his best suit, his face transformed with wonder and love as he watched her approach. Their vows were traditional but spoken with genuine feeling promises to love, honor, and cherish, to stand together through good times and bad, to build a life founded on mutual respect and shared purpose. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake's kiss was tender and reverent, a sacred seal on the commitment they had just made. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous and heartfelt. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by neighbors and friends, while music and laughter filled the air. Blake and Dahlia moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with grateful hearts. "So, Mrs. Jameson," Blake said as they finally found a moment alone, stepping outside into the cool evening air. "Are you happy?" Dahlia looked up at her husband, with a heart so full it seemed it might burst. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him. "And you?" "I have everything I could ever want," Blake replied, drawing her close. "A beautiful wife, land that sustains us, work that matters, and a community that cares. What more could a man ask for? Perhaps a family to share it all with someday," Dahlia suggested softly. Blake's smile was tender as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Someday soon, I hope. But for now, I'm content to begin our life together, just the two of us." As twilight deepened into night, they bid farewell to their guests and departed for their new home, the house that straddled both their properties, the physical manifestation of their union. Blake carried Dahlia across the threshold in the traditional manner, both of them laughing with the sheer joy of the moment. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From that first frightening night when she had hidden from outlaws in Blake's barn, to this moment of perfect contentment in his arms, it was a path neither of them could have foreseen, but one that had led to profound happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Blake murmured, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "About promises kept," Dahlia replied softly. "That night you found me in your barn, you promised I would never fear again. I didn't believe you then, how could I? You were a stranger and I had no reason to trust your word. And now?" Blake prompted, his voice warm in the darkness. Dahlia raised herself on one elbow to look down at her husband's face, barely visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Now, I know that some promises are meant to be kept for a lifetime. And I'm grateful beyond words that you're the man who made this one to me." Blake drew her down for a kiss that spoke of all the days and years to come of shared work and shared joy, of challenges faced together and triumphs celebrated as one, of a love that had begun in fear but had blossomed into something strong enough to last a lifetime. Outside their window, the Texas night wrapped around their new home like a protective cloak. The land they both loved stretched in all directions, united now as their hearts were united. And within those walls, two people who had found each other against all odds began to write the first chapter of their shared story, a story of love, courage, and promises kept under the vast and starry western sky.